Welcome to our conclusion to the topic on the life of Augustine and that of his teachings in general. Now, my dear students, this particular video will be a kind of a conclusion to the first week of our lesson on Augustine. Particularly, I will be basing my discussion in this video on the issues and themes that emerge during our engagement in the discussion thread of that particular week. That's why, my dear students, I would like really to encourage you to engage in the discussion with the current week, particularly on answering questions and reacting to the reactions of your classmates. Remember in my instruction that you have to post your own point of view, and then you have to comment on the views of your classmates, on two other classmates, so that the discussion will be able to, shall we say, become rich, and we enrich each other by our discussion and reactions. I think that the process is proven effective in terms of exploring the issue that you have to post your own ideas and concepts, and then you react on two other classmates' ideas. Okay, so in this particular video, I would like to discuss on the emerging topics and issues that emerge from the discussion of the first week. Now, the first thing that I would really want to discuss is on the question of whether Augustine was right or wrong in leaving his concubine. Now, in the Confessions, it's very clear that the woman was not named. She has no name there. Some authors would refer to that as the mistress of Augustine or a concubine of Augustine. Now, the reason why they cannot marry is that, according to the scholars, that Augustine is of a higher status than the woman, and we can presume that the woman is a slave, and the marriage between a Roman citizen, Augustine is a Roman citizen, and that of a slave cannot be possible. So it really is a problem for Monica, because she was a devout lady, a devout Catholic, a devout Christian Catholic, and she cannot bear to see Augustine living in a state of sin. Now, many of your answers actually on the particular topic is reflective of our contemporary way of thinking. In other words, when we look into that issue, we are actually basing our answer from our own experience or from our own philosophical orientation. And many of the philosophical orientation that is dominant now is relativistic and subjective. Subjective in the sense that for us, whatever is true, whatever is correct, will be based on how I, as a person, would judge a particular thing. So the basis is with regards to what is its effect on me. How am I affected with that? That's the subjectivism in a very simplistic explanation. Relativism, on the other hand, will tell us about the truth or the goodness of a thing or the morality of a thing depends on the time, for example. It depends on other factors that can shift. So it all depends. So we can say that relativism is summarized in that particular phrase, it all depends. Okay. Now, what was the contention? Some of you said that Augustine should have not left the woman because it is his responsibility as a man or as a husband, but they are not married that way, so I cannot call him husband, to the woman. Now, I think that idea is coming from our own uh, situation, our contemporary situation, wherein we are saying that when you engage in a relationship, you have to be responsible to me. Now, in the case of Augustine, it's really different. Why? Because number one, there is that impediment in the law that a citizen cannot marry a slave, more or less. Of course, there are some occasional exemptions to that. But I think one of the things that really compelled Augustine to leave his concubine is that he realized that he is living in a state of sin. Now, for us, nowadays, that particular sense of sin is absent. For example, I'll give you a very concrete example. Cohabitation is sinful. That is why in the church, we have a law, in the canon law, that's the law of the church, that if you are living together as man and wife, without marriage in the church, you are actually living in a state of sin. And in fact, there is a law that prohibits those who are living in together, cohabitating together, from receiving communion. So kung nag-live-in ka mo, kung wala ka mo nakasal sa simbahan, pero nakasal ka mo sa civil law or sa korte, hindi ka mo dapat magbaton sang communion. Nga because that act of living together is sinful. You are in the state of sin. Pero how do we look at it nowadays? Para sa aton, because we have already avoided that consciousness of sin, we have so become subjective. And now, how do we reason things out now? Sabi nila natin is this: as long as I love the person, as long as we are in love together, wala kayong pake alam sa mundo. Di ba, no? So it's a kind of as long as we are in love, nothing's wrong. Yan. That is a very good example of subjectivism. Now, during the time of Augustine, and Augustine being a philosopher, a Catholic philosopher, did not subscribe to that subjectivism. For him, when he became a Christian later on the process of being converted to Christianity totally upon reception of the baptism, he realized that he cannot live in a state of sin. That's why Augustine has to get out of that situation. He has to get out of that relationship, which is in the first place sinful. Sinful, why? Because they are not married in the church, but they are living as husband and wife. So you see the difference now. There is really a divide in terms of the reasoning of Augustine and our own reasoning nowadays. For him, the situation is sinful. So, he has to get out of it. Ngayon, the way we look at it, the situation is no longer sinful because we don't have a sense of sin. And as long as we are in love, a very subjective philosophy, then everything is good and fine. Now, you see now the difference. So, looking back now into the situation of Augustine, he came to realize that he cannot truly become faithful to his search for the truth if he is living a lie. Amo man abala, no? For example, if you want to get cured of something, you have to get out of the environment that is not healthy. For example, you want to avoid dengue, but you are living in a swamp, for example. So, even how much you're going to say that you are going to be good there, but the situation is not healthy. So what will happen? Eventually, you'll get affected with a disease or an illness. And for example, also, although this might not be a very good example, but it can be illustrative. If, for example, you have cancer of the breast, for example, for the women. So what do? Either, in order to be cured, of course you take your medicines, chemotherapy, but there is, to that extent sometimes, that you have to remove the afflicted part of your body. And unless you remove that, you cannot become healthy. So, that is also the case of Augustine and this concubine. The situation is sinful. And Augustine, being a man of God, searching for God, he really has to get out of the situation. And so he has no choice. He has to leave behind the woman. But take note, Augustine was in love with the woman. Augustine was in love with that woman. And as I already mentioned in class, he is not a fornicator. Sometimes we have this wrong perception that Augustine is a playboy. No, jumping from one woman to another, that's wrong. He was in love with the woman and he remained faithful to that woman. Unfortunately, the relationship itself is in the state of sin, based on the teachings of the church, that a man and a woman can only live as a husband and a wife when they are married by the church. So he has to leave behind that woman. But take note, he did not abandon the woman to her own fate. She was, Augustine knew that she entered a monastery for women celibates, and she lived a life of prayer and holiness. On the other hand, Adeodatus, his son, he took care of Adeodatus up until the time that Adeodatus died at an early age. So wala siya nagpabaya. Ang problema sa subungang panahon is that many of our contemporaries are cohabitating together, and sometimes they would even abandon each other and their children. Kadamo sa mga lalaki, for example, ang pamataan, ang mga babae, and then they would just live it. Now that is a different case. That is not the same as Augustine. And besides, in the first place, cohabitation, as I mentioned, is already sinful. So you see, my dear students, when you look back into the past, you have to understand that we are looking at it from our own point of view. So we have to be aware and conscious of our point of view, so that we will be able to see the situation or event in its particular context, at the same time see ourselves in our own context. I remember in phenomenology, it's called bracketing. When we have to bracket, you have to suspend our own contemporary experience, our own opinion, so that we can see the situation that was in the past in its essence, or in a more clear, or rather in a clearer manner. So my dear students, that's something that we will have to take note of. We have to be aware of ourselves first. We have to be aware of our own biases and prejudices, so that we can bracket it, and upon bracketing it, we will be able to see the situation of Augustine in a different perspective, and at the same time able to transfer it or connect it with our own lives. Okay, so that's the first issue that I wanted to be clear from the thread. The second thing that I would like to talk about is on the merits of the Confessions as an autobiography, but at the same time, a way of guide to our own life. Notice that the journey of Augustine is a journey of a process. It's a process. The conversion of Augustine is not it's not like the conversion of Paul, wherein Paul was walking on the road to Damascus, and then suddenly there was a light, and then everything done deal, magic, a miracle, and Paul Saul became Paul, and he became the apostle to the Gentiles, and so on and so forth. Now, Augustine, although the crucial moment in his life was when the time when he heard about the children singing a particular chant, or maybe it's a game, we don't know, of tole lege or tole lege, take and read, and because of that, by some shall we say synchronicity, he was able to read a particular portion of the letter of Paul that really answered his questions and his issues at the time. But if you notice, Augustine already searched for God. So we can see that in the Confessions. It's not a one-shot deal. It's a continuous process of discovering what is truth, what is the truth. And we know that, as Jesus said, I am the truth. I am the way, the life, and I am the way, the truth, and the life. So a person for us, just like St. Augustine who said this, a person who searches for the truth is actually unknowingly is searching for Christ. Because after all is said and done, Christ is the truth. So, it's a process. It took time. Augustine took time to be converted. So, as a life natin, I think, it will take us time to realize what is true. It will take us time to discover God. But we can see here that the discovery of Augustine led him to the church. It led him to the Catholic Church. And later on, he became one of the greatest teachers in that particular church, and that is the Catholic Church. Okay, now, third point, and this will be the last point. One of the things that also emerged from the discussion is with regards to love. What is love? How is love understood in the context of Augustine? And how do we understood that in our own context? So maybe we can say at this point, because that is the topic of this current week. We are now on the week wherein we discuss about Augustine and love. But we can see here that there is a connection between freedom and love. A person who is truly loving will not be insisting himself in a situation that will become his unfreedom, where he will become unfree. Real love, because God is love, will always lead us to what is true and to condemn what is false. So I think that's one thing that is very relevant nowadays. Kasi nowadays, love has become a mantra, or shall we say, the sole criterion for evaluating things. As long as you are in love, then everything is okay. As long as I love myself, everything is okay. As long as you accept me for who I am, then it's okay. Now, that's very problematic. Problematic in the sense that love has become cheap nowadays. Our loving has become cheap. Because love has become now synonymous with toleration. So, if you love me, just tolerate whatever I want. Now that is problematic. So if I want to be like this, although I'm living a lie, and if you love me, then tolerate me. For example, relationships, because Augustine is more of relationships in some sense as we know it, but there is more to Augustine than just mere relationships. For example, this is the case usually, based on my experience as a priest, and many who goes to me for counseling or for confessions would confess this pattern of sin, or a state of sin in terms of relationship. For example, there is one couple, they became estranged to one another and they fall out of love. And so the man or the woman, whatever the case is, found a new love to another person who happens to be also married but estranged at that particular moment. So we have two pairs of a disillusioned, estranged couple who are now living separately. But the man of couple A and the woman of couple B met, and they fall in love, or rather, in the past tense, they fell in love with each other. Okay. So, oftentimes they would tell me that, Father, wala naman kami sa amon ng mga bana kag-asawa. We are already living for like 10 years, 15 years together, and we have our own children, and we have moved on with our lives. We have moved on with our lives away from our legally and canonically married partners, because most often they are married in the church. So how do you evaluate this? It's a very difficult situation to evaluate. But if you are listening to the narrative, they would always claim that it is okay for them to live together because they are in love with each other. Now my first question would be, okay, how about if you will fall out of love again? What will happen? You can just separate and move on and go on your merry way, finding another partner. So the cycle will become vicious. So you fell out of love with the first partner, you got married, you live in with the second partner because you're in love. So what will happen now if you are going to fall out of love? So you go again and find another partner, and that is one of the realities of the United States, wherein a woman will have 3 or 4 husbands in her lifetime, and the same is true with us, with the divorcee men. So they have, in their lifetime, they have 3 or 5 or something like that partners in life, because they got married with this partner, and then when they fall out of love, they got divorced, and then fall in love with another man or another woman, and then they got divorced after falling out of love. You see, my dear friends, falling in love and falling out of love is not the criterion. The question is, if you are a person of faith, especially if you are Catholic, we believe that marriage is up until the end, up until death. The bond of marriage remains. It is not broken by mere saying that you are falling out of love. It cannot be broken that way, because it is a bond that is for a lifetime, and only death can separate that bond. Okay, you may ask and react now by telling me that, hey, Father, how about if you are no longer happy with the man? And okay, you see, another subjective question, or rather a subjective principle, happiness. But happiness is fleeting. It is not a basis for, I can be happy this moment, and the next hour I will be unhappy. So what will happen now? Just because I am not unhappy, I am unhappy now, I will leave my partner or my husband or my wife? It's not. Remember, in the vows, it is said there, it is actually anticipated by the church, that you will be together in your vows for better or for worse, in richer or poorer, in sickness or in health. In other words, entering into a real relationship is not merely for the good times. To be a husband or to be a wife is both in good times and in bad times. Pero nowadays, we want the good times but not the bad times. So another objection might be, I am suffering in this relationship. Okay, question, what kind of suffering? Because there is suffering that is part of growing up and part of adjustment, or suffering out of a psychological deficiency or a psychological nature or an emotional nature. Then we can differentiate that. For example, if your husband is hurting you most often, For example, sadistang mana mo ya, or mga kaya iglesia, kastigo niya ka, what do you do? Of course, get out of the relationship. The church is not telling you to endure that kind of a relationship because your partner, unknowingly, you don't know it, is psychologically immature. Wala silang simbahan, bilang agwan tahon mo na dahil inasakit ka na. No. But the church is teaching us that if that suffering or that difficulty is due to the transition or a kind of a developmental adjustment, psychosocial or psychological or emotional adjustment of living together as couple, then you have to endure it. But if your life, for example, is endangered, or your emotional well-being is endangered, or your psychological well-being is endangered, then of course you have to leave that man away, behind, and go away. So wala kasi yung simbahan yung magpakamartir ka dyan. No. That's not the teaching. That is not the teaching of the church. Pero what the church is teaching, and I think Augustine is along that line, because after all, many of our teachings on marriage is actually based on Augustine's work. What we can see here is that love will always be a guide towards the truth. And the greatest of that manifestation of that love is the love of Jesus on the cross. That's true love. That's why there is no greater love that we can give to our friends, but that love that offers our life so that others may live. So it is a love that will endure. It is a love that endures difficulties. It is a love that endures poverty. It is a love that endures sadness. And I think that is where we moderns, our contemporary generation, fails. We have been bombarded by the idea of a romantic love. A love that is filled with so many joys and laughters and smiles. A love that has its own soundtrack. Everything is good, everything is fine, everything is beautiful. But we have forgotten to tell the other side of the story. And the other side of the story is, if there are sunny days, there are also rainy days. If there are days of joy, there will always be days of sadness. And it is this that if we are able to transcend, if we are able to go above these particular challenges, then we can truly say that we have loved. So my dear friends, thank you for this session with you. Hopefully you will be able to find more a clearer understanding, a deeper understanding of our subject in our current lesson now, which is on Augustine and love, and we will discuss that in the after this week, and by next week. So thank you again. Please engage with us in a conversation online by sharing your ideas on the thread that is now current. Thank you very much, and see you next time. Thank you.